Long before the first word was carved into clay, humanity had already filled the world with memory. Around fires inside caves, beside rivers and under Ice Age skies, people carried knowledge in stories, symbols, tools, and landscapes. This is the forgotten first age of humankind, a world before writing but not before history. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy ancient mysteries, lost worlds, and the hidden origins of civilization. Long before the first sign is pressed into clay, long before a king orders his name carved into stone, long before a scribe bends over a tablet and begins turning speech into marks, the world is already full of human meaning. A child wakes in the half-light beside a dying fire. Outside the shelter, frost lies silver on grass, or desert wind moves through dry reeds, or rain taps against hide stretched over poles. There is no calendar on a wall, no map scratched with borders, no list of laws, no written memory of who owns the valley, who married whom, who died in the last winter, or where the herds passed when the moon was thin. Yet nothing about this world is empty. It is crowded with knowledge. Every slope has a remembered danger. Every bend in a river has a story. Every scar on an elder's body carries instruction. Every tool, song, burial, footprint, and gesture belongs to a vast human archive that no one has yet learned to write down. This is the world before writing, and it is not a world before intelligence, before culture, or before history in the deeper sense. It is only a world before history becomes visible in the way later ages prefer to see it. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings live, adapt, love, fear, plan, mourn, migrate, invent, and explain themselves without leaving a single sentence behind. Their lives are not silent to them. They speak constantly. They teach by example. They sing. They remember by rhythm and repetition. They read weather in cloud edges, animal movement in broken grass, kinship, in faces, obligation in ritual and warning, in places where the dead are not forgotten. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the first and strangest part of the human story is not written in books. It is written in bone ash, ochre stone, and landscape. To modernize, writing feels almost inseparable from civilization. A society seems to become real when it can name itself, count its grain record, its rulers preserve its myths, and argue with the future. But that feeling is misleading. Writing arrives astonishingly late. If the long existence of Homo sapiens were compressed into a single day, writing would appear only in the final minutes before midnight. For nearly all of humanity's time on Earth, people live in what later scholars call prehistory, a word that can sound like a waiting room before the important story begins. But the word is a limitation of evidence, not a judgment on the people themselves. The evidence remains incomplete because words decay when they are never fixed to durable surfaces. Voices disappear into air. Memories vanish with the last person who carries them. Whole worlds can pass through time and leave only a sharpened flint, a hearth stain, a painted animal on a cave wall, or a grave arranged with care, and yet those traces are enough to suggest something immense. In the beginning of the forgotten First Age, humans are not standing outside culture slowly waiting to become modern. They are already modern in the most important and unsettling ways. They notice patterns. They imagine what is absent. They prepare for seasons that have not yet arrived. They understand death, or at least they respond to it with actions that go beyond practical disposal. They decorate body-shaped tools with traditions that last for generations, and move materials across distances that imply contact, memory, and trust. What survives in the record suggests that before writing, humanity builds invisible systems as complex as any palace systems of kinship, taboo, obligation, teaching, and belief. The architecture is not made of brick, it is made of minds. The first age is therefore difficult to enter because almost everything most personal about it has vanished. No one writes down the name of the woman who knows which roots heal fever. No one preserves the private grief of a hunter who returns without a brother. No one records the jokes told around a fire after a dangerous crossing, or the careful instruction given to a child learning how not to waste stone. The people of this world are everywhere and nowhere. Archaeology can find where they sat, what they ate, what they carried, where they butchered animals, where they slept, where they buried their dead, and sometimes where they placed their hands against rock and left a shadow in pigment. But it cannot easily recover the full sound of their languages, the exact shape of their prayers, or the stories that made a hill sacred instead of merely high. That absence creates a strange kind of mystery. Later civilizations often vanish through collapse, invasion, drought, fire, or abandonment, but the world before writing vanishes by default. It vanishes because it belongs to breath. It survives only when action touches matter. A meal disappears unless bones are left behind. A journey disappears unless footprints harden in mud. A ceremony disappears unless pigment stone or burial goods remain. A law disappears unless it changes the arrangement of bodies, houses, tools, or land. For this reason, the earliest human past is not a dark room so much as a room lit by brief flashes. A tooth, a blade, a bead, a hearth, a painted horse, a shell carried far inland. Each flash reveals one corner, then darkness closes again. Still, it would be a mistake to imagine these people as simple because their evidence is fragmentary. Their world demands intelligence every hour. Without written storage, knowledge must live inside people and practices. A mistake can be fatal. The wrong plant, the wrong crossing, the wrong season, the wrong reading of animal behavior can mean hunger or death. Memory is not decoration, it is technology. Elders become libraries. Children become apprentices to landscapes. Social life becomes a method of preserving information. Songs can encode roots. Rituals can protect rules. Myths can warn against dangerous places, explain animal habits, or preserve memories of floods, fires, and migrations long after the original event has blurred. Scholars still debate how far back such deep memories can reach, and no single explanation fully accounts for the endurance of oral tradition, but it is clear that people without writing are not people without records. Their records are simply carried in different forms. The forgotten First Age also reminds us that the boundary between nature and culture is not as clean as it later appears. A river is not only water moving through a valley, it is a path, a source of food, a danger in flood, a seasonal marker, a meeting place, perhaps a line between groups, perhaps a being with personality and force. A herd is not only meat, it is timing, cooperation, risk, gratitude, fear, and memory. Stone is not only stone, it is chosen, struck, traded, touched, taught, and sometimes valued far from where it was found. Even fire is more than warmth. It gathers people into a circle, extends the day, changes food, hardens wood, frightens predators, and creates the glowing center around which human imagination can lengthen. Somewhere in that firelight, the roots of writing already exist, though no one yet writes. They exist in the need to remember beyond the present body. They exist in the urge to mark, count, repeat, preserve, and transmit. They exist when a handprint remains after the hand is gone, when a carved pattern outlives its maker, when a burial tells the living that the dead still matter. Writing will one day change everything, but it does not create the human hunger for memory. It only gives that hunger a new surface. Before the first marks, then humanity's world is not blank. It is overflowing, but its abundance is fragile. Most of it cannot cross the abyss of time. The first age is forgotten, not because it was empty, but because it was alive in forms that rarely fossilize. To approach it, one must listen to what does not speak plainly: the broken edge of a tool, the red stain of ochre, the curve of a path, the placement of bones near a hearth. In these fragments, the first great human world begins to return not as a written story, but as a presence just beyond language. Around the fire, the forgotten first age becomes easier to imagine, not because fire preserves speech, but because it gathers the conditions that speech needs. Darkness presses close. The outer world grows uncertain. Beyond the circle of light, animals move, wind shifts, branches crack, and every listener knows that attention is not a luxury. Inside, the glow faces become visible. Hands point, imitate, warn, measure distance in the air. A hunter shows the angle of a spear thrust. An elder repeats the movement of a wounded animal. Someone taps a rhythm against wood or bone, not as entertainment alone, but as a way of fixing a pattern in memory. Before a mark can live on clay or stone, knowledge lives in bodies, voices, breath, and repetition. This is where the first human archive truly works. It is not arranged on shelves. It has no labels, no written index, no official keeper with a reed stylus. It moves from person to person by performance. A child learns how to shape stone by watching the same controlled strike again and again, seeing not only the blow but the pause before it, the selection of the core, the turn of the wrist, the small correction after a flake breaks badly. A young gatherer learns plants not from a written list of species, but by smell, season, leaf shape, soil, insect marks, and the careful warnings attached to mistakes. The lesson is not abstract. It comes with stories of illness, hunger, recovery, and death. In such a world, teaching is not separate from survival. It is survival extending itself into another mind. Modern people often underestimate oral cultures because writing has trained later societies to trust what is fixed and distrust what changes in the telling. Yet spoken memory can be disciplined with astonishing care. Rhythm, melody, formula, gesture, and ritual repetition help stabilize information across generations. A song is easier to remember than a plain statement. A story with repeated patterns travels farther than a random instruction. A rule wrapped in ceremony gains emotional force. The evidence remains incomplete because prehistoric songs do not fossilize, but the importance of sound and performance can be inferred from later oral traditions and from the deep human tendency to bind memory to pattern. Before writing, the mind does not simply store facts. It stores them as movement, image, feeling, and sequence. There is a surprising sophistication in that. To pass on a hunting strategy, people must do more than say where animals might be found. They must preserve timing, wind direction, group coordination, animal habits, risk, and restraint. To pass on knowledge of stone, they must teach not only what works, but what has worked here with this material under these conditions. The best flint or obsidian is not always nearby. Some stones fracture predictably, others betray the hand. Some tools are made quickly and discarded. Others require planning through many stages, as if the maker sees the finished edge hidden inside the raw core before the first blow falls. Long before writing, humans already live with future images in their minds. Around the fire, these future images become shared. Someone describes a river crossing that will happen tomorrow. The group imagines it before reaching it. They picture the deep place, the safer stones, the reeds where animals may hide. This ability to speak of what is not present is one of humanity's quiet revolutions. It allows a band to plan beyond immediate sight. It lets the dead remain socially present. It lets a distant valley matter, even when no one can see it. It lets danger be remembered without being repeated. Scholars still debate the exact stages by which language became fully modern, and no bone can preserve grammar. But the archaeological record points again and again to minds capable of planning, teaching symbolism and social complexity across immense spans of time. The fire also changes the shape of the day. It pushes back darkness and creates hours that are not devoted only to walking, hunting, gathering, or making tools. Cooked food softens roots and meat, perhaps reducing the energy spent chewing and digesting. Warmth allows people to endure colder environments. Light permits work after sunset. But perhaps just as important, fire makes a social theatre. In daylight, the group is scattered by tasks. At night, bodies draw inward, faces flicker, attention narrows. Stories can grow longer. Children can listen while half asleep. The dangerous outer world becomes a dark audience around the human circle. It is here that memory may become emotional architecture. Fear teaches, but so does wonder. A story about a predator is more memorable if the predator becomes more than an animal, if it carries a pattern of behavior, a warning, a place, a season. A tale about a flood may preserve practical knowledge of where water rises fastest. A tale about a mountain may encode roots, taboos, or ownership. A tale about the dead may bind a group to its ancestors and to one another. What survives in the record suggests that early humans care not only about food and danger, but about belonging, identity, and meaning. Burials, ornaments, pigments, and repeated tool traditions all hint at communities where memory is shared, not merely individual. The human voice is especially powerful because it can carry uncertainty without destroying trust. A skilled storyteller can say that something happened long ago, that the elders told it, that the exact place is lost, that the lesson remains. This matters in a world where evidence is often seasonal and partial. Tracks fade, herds shift, rivers change course, people vanish into distance. Oral knowledge must adapt while remaining recognizable. It must be stable enough to guide, flexible enough to survive change. No single explanation fully accounts for how early communities balance those needs, but the endurance of non-written knowledge in many human societies shows that memory can be organized with tools other than script. And those tools are not merely mental, they are embodied. A dance can rehearse group movement, a chant can synchronize labor, a repeated hand gesture can teach how to twist fiber, throw a spear, scrape a hide, or shape a blade. The body remembers what words alone may lose. Even today, many skills cannot be learned fully from written instruction. The hand must feel resistance, the ear must hear the right sound, the eye must catch a tiny change in texture. In the world before writing, this embodied knowledge is not a secondary form of intelligence, it is central. So the first age is not silent. It is loud with voices that time has erased. It is full of stories that once had names, songs that once had rhythms, warnings that once made children pause at the edge of water, and jokes that once made tired people laugh under cold stars. Writing will eventually preserve speech by transforming it into marks, but it will also narrow what survives. It will favour accounts, rulers, property law, and later literature. Around the fire, memory is broader and more fragile. It holds the weather, the dead, the root, the animal, the tool, the fear, the laugh, and the lesson together. For thousands upon thousands of generations, this is enough to carry humanity forward. If memory begins around the fire, it does not stay there. At dawn, it walks out into the open world where every ridge, marsh, spring cliff, and animal path becomes part of a vast unwritten map. For people before writing, landscape is not scenery. It is instruction. It tells where water gathers after dry months, where stone good enough for blades can be found, where herds cross in autumn, where storms build behind distant hills, where ice is safe, where reeds hide birds, where certain trees flower, before fish return upstream. To live well is to read the ground with the attention later ages give to manuscripts. A valley is a page, a coastline is a memory line, a mountain is a marker that can be seen from far away, holding direction in a world without drawn borders. The speaking landscape does not speak in words, but it is never mute. Broken branches can say that animals passed recently. A scatter of shells can say that people camped here before. Smoke on a far slope can say that another group is near. The colour of grass can reveal damp soil beneath it. The flight of birds can betray water beyond a rise. A cave mouth can promise shelter, but also danger because bears big cats or earlier human visitors may have used it first. Knowledge of such signs accumulates through generations, and without writing it must be taught in motion. Children learn by walking and by being corrected. They learn that one hill is safe in thunder, another is not, that a bend in the river looks harmless until flood season. That open plain is easiest to cross when wind hides scent from grazing animals. This kind of mapping is difficult for archaeology to recover because paths leave lighter traces than monuments. A route may be used for centuries and still vanish under forest sand, sea or plough. Yet what survives in the record suggests that prehistoric people moved through their worlds with deep geographic intelligence. Materials appear far from their sources. Obsidian shells, pigments high-quality flint, and decorative stones travel across long distances, sometimes through movement, sometimes through exchange between groups. These objects are more than goods. They are evidence of remembered roots, social links, meeting places, and trust networks. Before maps on bark hide or clay survive in any clear form, there are maps held in bodies and stories. A river in this world is both road and boundary. It carries fish reeds, freshwater birds, and seasonal abundance. It also carries risk. It can rise suddenly, cut off a camp, drown a crossing, or erase footprints by morning. People who live with rivers come to know their moods. They may remember the gravel bank where animals drink the tree that marks a ford, the high ground where ancestors once waited out a flood. Scholars still debate how many ancient flood memories survived into later mythic traditions, and the evidence remains incomplete, but it is not difficult to understand why water becomes sacred, feared, and storied. A river can feed a group for generations and still kill without warning. Caves speak differently. From the outside, they are dark openings in stone. Inside, they change the human sense of time. Sound behaves strangely. Firelight moves against walls. Footsteps become deliberate. Some caves are practical shelters used for living, but many painted chambers lie deep beyond easy habitation. Even before considering the art, the cave itself shapes experience. It removes the sky. It narrows the world. It makes stone seem older than any human memory. In such places, landscape becomes more than a resource. It becomes a threshold. No single explanation fully accounts for why some communities entered these depths to mark them, but repeated attention to caves across Ice Age Europe and elsewhere suggests that certain places held meanings not reducible to shelter alone. Mountains and cliffs offer another kind of permanence. They are visible across distance, and because they appear stable across human lifetimes, they can anchor stories more securely than camps or seasonal huts. A mountain may guide travelers, divide territories, attract storms, hold snow-hide animals, or mark the edge of a known world. Long before formal borders, people can belong to a landscape through repeated use and remembered association. They know where their dead lie, where a certain stone outcrop gives the right material, where a dangerous pass must be crossed before winter. Belonging is not written as ownership, but lived as familiarity, obligation, and return. Coastlines add a stranger problem because they're among the most useful and most fragile landscapes in deep time. Shores offer shellfish fish birds, seaweed, driftwood salt and travel routes. They also change dramatically when climate shifts. During the Ice Age, lower sea levels expose vast coastal plains that later disappear beneath rising water. Many early human camps may now lie drowned beyond easy excavation. This means the record we possess is biased toward places that remained above water. The First Age may have been more coastal and more connected by sea edges than surviving evidence can easily show. Hunting paths too are part of this living geography. Humans follow animals, but they also learn to predict them. A herd is a moving landscape tying distant grazing grounds, water points and seasonal rhythms together. To hunt successfully, people must know not only where animals are, but where they will be. This turns memory into anticipation. The land becomes animated by expected movement: reindeer over a pass gazelle along a valley bison near waterbirds, returning with warmer air. In this world, story and geography blend because memory needs places to hold it. A warning attached to a nameless stretch of water may fade, but a warning attached to the place where someone was lost, where an ancestor made a mistake, or where unseen danger is believed to wait becomes harder to ignore. The practical and the sacred do not have to be separate. A taboo may protect a dangerous cliff. A ritual may regulate access to scarce water. A myth may preserve the importance of returning at the right season. The speaking landscape is therefore one of humanity's first libraries. It stores knowledge in landmarks, routes, campsites, burial places, stone sources, animal crossings, and sacred depths. Yet it is also vulnerable. Rivers shift, forests advance, ice retreats, seas rise. People move away, and when the last person who knows the story of a hill is gone, the hill remains, but its human meaning thins. The land is still here, but much of what it once said has fallen silent. A hand reaches for stone, and the First Age becomes visible in a different way. Not through a sentence, not through a name, not through a recorded event, but through a decision preserved in matter. A pebble is lifted, turned rejected. Another is chosen because its grain is right, because it breaks with a clean edge, because someone has learned from long practice that this kind of stone will answer the strike. The hammer falls, a flake leaps away. In that sharp fragment there is more than survival. There is memory made physical. The hand is gone, the voice that taught the movement is gone, but the pattern of thought remains in the scar left on stone. Tools are among the oldest surviving witnesses of the world before writing, and at first they can seem plain, almost mute. A cutting edge, a scraper, a point, a core, with flakes removed from it. Yet every tool is a record of choices. It shows what material was selected, what technique was used, how much planning shaped the object before it was finished, and sometimes whether the maker was following a tradition older than their own life. A simple stone flake may be made quickly and discarded after use, but many prehistoric tools reveal careful sequences of action. The maker must imagine a future form hidden inside the raw material. One blow prepares another, one angle creates the possibility of the next. Long before anyone writes a plan, human beings are planning in stone. This matters because technology is never only practical. It carries habits, identities, and teaching. A tool made in a recognizable style can belong to a group tradition passed from older hands to younger ones. It can reveal migration, contact, or isolation. When archaeologists find similar methods across wide regions, they are not only finding objects, they are seeing the spread of knowledge. When methods differ, they may be seeing local adaptation, cultural preference, available materials, or separate teaching lineages. The evidence remains incomplete because stone survives better than wood, fibre, skin, and food. But even this biased record shows a humanity capable of precision, patience, and inherited skill. Most of the world before writing was probably made of materials that have vanished. Wooden spears, woven baskets, hide containers, plant fiber cords, bone needles, traps, nets carrying bags, shelters, clothing, and sleeping mats would have shaped daily life as much as stone tools did, perhaps more. But organic things decay unless protected by unusual conditions such as dryness, freezing waterlogging, or mineralization. This creates one of the great distortions in deep history. The Stone Age was never made only of stone. It is called that because stone is what endures. The missing world may have been full of textures, scraped hide, twisted sinew, polished wood, plaited grasses, feathers, shells, fur, smoke-darkened poles, and containers repaired again and again until they could no longer hold. Some objects cross the line between tool and symbol. A pierced shell, a bead, a piece of ochre, an engraved bone, a shaped pendant. These things may not cut meat or scrape hides better than undecorated things, yet they survive as signs that people care about appearance, belonging, exchange, and perhaps status. A bead is small, but it can carry a large social weight. It can say something about who a person is, where they come from, who they are connected to, or what group recognizes them. Scholars still debate the exact meanings of many early ornaments, and no single explanation fully accounts for their variety. But the act of wearing or carrying decorations suggests a world where identity is not merely biological. It is displayed, negotiated, remembered, and seen. Ochre is especially haunting. Red, yellow, and brown earth pigments appear again and again in prehistoric contexts, sometimes used on bodies, tools, burials, cave walls, or objects. Red ochre can look startlingly alive, like dried blood or sunset pressed into dust. It may have practical uses, including hide treatment or adhesive mixtures, but its repeated presence in symbolic settings suggests meanings beyond simple utility. A body dusted with pigment, a shell stained red, a hand pressed to rock with colour blown around it. These are actions that seem to insist on presence. Someone wants a mark to remain. Someone wants colour to transform the ordinary surface of skin, stone, or bone into something noticed. Carved and engraved objects deepen the mystery. A bone incised with the lines may be decoration, counting, rhythm, ownership, teaching, or something else entirely. A pattern can look simple, but simplicity is not the same as emptiness. Repeated notches may record days, lunar phases, kills, exchanges, or ritual sequences, though many claims are difficult to prove. The evidence often resists certainty. Archaeologists must ask whether marks are intentional, whether they form a pattern, whether they were made by human hands, and whether the pattern has meaning beyond habit or ornament. What survives in the records suggests that people are experimenting with permanence long before writing. They are learning that a mark can outlast the moment of making. This is one of the quiet turning points of the forgotten First Age. Once a mark remains, memory begins to leave the body. It does not yet become writing. It does not yet encode speech in a systematic script. But it changes the relationship between people and time. A pendant can be passed to another person. A carved object can be carried across a landscape. A decorated tool can preserve the touch of someone dead. A painted stone can stay in a shelter after the group moves on. Meaning begins to cling to matter. The making of such objects also changes the maker. To shape a bead, polish bone, pierce shell, or grind pigment takes time that could have been spent on immediate food or shelter. This does not mean survival was easy. It means that even under pressure, human life includes attention to things that cannot be reduced to calories. Beauty, memory, belonging, and ritual are not late luxuries added after civilization. They are part of the deep structure of being human. Even in harsh climates, even in small mobile bands, people make things that ask to be seen. And in these things the first age speaks with unusual intimacy. A stone blade records technique, but a bead records closeness to the body. It may have rested against skin, it may have moved as someone walked, it may have been touched in fear, pride, grief, or habit. We cannot recover the exact feeling attached to it, but we can see that someone cared enough to make it keep it, wear it, or bury it. That care is evidence. Before writing, humanity learns to place memory into hands and objects. Tools remember skill, ornaments remember identity, pigments remember presence, carvings remember pattern. None of them tells a full story, but together they show that the human mind is already reaching beyond the vanishing moment. A mark on bone, a red stain in earth, a shell carried far from the sea. These are not yet words, but they are no longer silence. Deep inside certain caves far beyond the reach of ordinary daylight, the first age leaves one of its most mysterious forms of memory. The path inward is often difficult. The ground dips, narrows, and turns. Stone presses close. The air cools. Sound changes. A footstep that would vanish outside becomes a small event in the dark. Firelight does not fill these chambers evenly. It trembles, catches on mineral surfaces, and makes walls seem to breathe. Then suddenly animals appear. Horses, bison, deer, lions, mammoths, rhinoceroses, handprints, dots, lines, signs, whose meanings are still uncertain. They are not written words, but they are not random marks either. They belong to minds that have entered darkness with purpose. Cave art is among the most powerful evidence that people before writing live in symbolic worlds. Some images are direct and astonishingly skilled. A horse's head curves with such confidence that it seems made in a single remembered motion. A bison's shoulder swells with weight. A lion's body stretches forward as if still hunting through stone. Other images are stranger abstract signs, repeated marks, finger tracings, hand stencils, and arrangements that resist easy interpretation. The evidence remains incomplete because we do not know the stories that once surrounded these images. We do not know the names of the animals, the makers, the places, or the ceremonies. But the care, repetition, and location of the art suggest that these caves are not merely decorated shelters. Many are something deeper. Some painted chambers are not comfortable places to live. They lie too far inside, too dark, too narrow, too awkward for everyday occupation. This alone changes how they must be understood. People carry light into them. They bring pigments, tools, and knowledge of where to go. They accept danger because caves can confuse, suffocate, collapse, or trap. The act of making an image in such a place requires preparation. Pigments must be gathered and ground. Lamps or torches must be maintained. Surfaces must be chosen. In some cases, natural bulges in the rock become part of the animal's body, as if the artist sees a creature already half emerging from stone. The wall is not treated as a blank sheet, it is read. Scholars still debate why these images were made. Hunting magic was once a popular explanation, perhaps painting an animal helped bring success in the hunt. In some cases, that idea may preserve a piece of the truth, but no single explanation fully accounts for the full range of cave imagery. Some animals painted beautifully were not the main animals eaten. Some dangerous creatures appear with special force. Some signs repeat across distances in ways that may suggest shared symbolic conventions. Other interpretations emphasize ritual initiation, trance storytelling, territorial memory, seasonal gatherings, or communication with forces believed to exist beyond ordinary sight. The most careful answer is also the least dramatic, different caves groups. Periods and images may have served different purposes. Still, one thing is clear. These images are not casual. They show sustained attention to animals and to the unseen life of places. Ice Age people know animals intimately because survival depends on them, but the art suggests more than practical familiarity. It captures movement, mass temperament, and presence. These are not crude diagrams for instruction. They are encounters. The animals seem to carry a power that exceeds food. A mammoth is meat, hide, bone, risk, memory, season, and awe. A lion is danger, mastery, fear, and perhaps a being whose strength must be acknowledged even if it is not hunted. In the cave, animals become more than animals. They become figures of thought. Handprints bring the mystery closer. A hand placed against stone pigment blown around it leaves a negative image that still feels immediate after tens of thousands of years. The person is absent, yet the outline remains. Some hands are large, some small, some missing fingers, or bent in ways that may reflect injury, gesture, frostbite, symbolic coding, or artistic convention. The evidence remains uncertain, but the emotional force is undeniable. Unlike an animal image, a handprint says that a human body was here. It turns the cave into a meeting point across time. The hand does not speak, but it almost does. There are also marks made by fingers dragged through soft clay, sometimes by adults, sometimes possibly by children or adolescents, though care is needed in assigning age. These traces remind us that cave spaces may have involved more than solitary artists. They may have included groups teaching ritual participation or movement through darkness as a shared experience. A child touching a wall in the deep cave is not writing a sentence, yet the gesture becomes part of a record that outlasts nearly everything else from that life. The survival of such small acts is one of archaeology's strange mercies. The caves also reveal the limits of modern certainty. It is tempting to call the images art, religion, magic, maps, memory, or myth. Each word opens something and closes something else. Art can make the images seem aesthetic and separate from daily life. Religion can impose later categories onto people who may not have divided the sacred and practical in familiar ways. Magic can sound dismissive if used carelessly. Map may be too narrow. Story may be too vague. What survives in the record suggests symbolic behavior of great depth, but the original meanings remain partly locked away, not because the images are meaningless, but because meaning lived in performances, voices, bodies, and beliefs that did not fossilize. Even so, the caves change how the First Age feels. They show that humans before writing are already concerned with permanence, transformation, and hidden space. They return to certain places. They make marks where sunlight cannot easily reach. They use darkness not simply as absence, but as setting. They turn animals into presences that continue after the fire goes out. They leave human hands where human voices vanish. In the world before writing, the cave is one of the first great archives, but it is not an archive of sentences. It is an archive of attention. It preserves what people looked at, closely feared, deeply remembered repeatedly, and perhaps hoped to influence or honor. It does not explain itself in the way a later inscription tries to do. It asks to be approached slowly with humility. The painted walls do not give us the lost stories, but they prove that the stories existed. Somewhere in the dark, before any alphabet, humanity is already making the invisible visible. Above the painted caves and open hunting grounds, the Ice Age sky lowers like a hard ceiling over the human world. Glaciers lock enormous volumes of water into ice. Sea levels fall, coastlines move outward, winds grow sharper across exposed plains. In some regions, cold steppe stretches where forests will later stand. In others, deserts expand, rains shift, and familiar habitats break apart. Humanity does not live in one uniform frozen wasteland because the Ice Age is a patchwork of refuges, grasslands, river valleys, coastal edges, mountains, and seasonal corridors. But everywhere, climate becomes a force that presses on memory. To survive is to notice change before it becomes disaster. This pressure helps explain why the First Age cannot be imagined as a slow, simple drift through time. It is full of movement. Groups follow herds, retreat from ice, cross exposed land bridges, return to warmer valleys, test new coasts, and learn the moods of unfamiliar animals. The world is larger in some ways and narrower in others. Lower seas expose land that later generations will never see. Dry plains connect places that water will one day divide. But ice walls, deserts, mountains, and empty stretches can also isolate communities for long periods. The map of the Ice Age is alive, breathing with cold and warmth across thousands of years. In such a world, cooperation becomes a form of shelter. A lone human is vulnerable, but a group can watch in several directions, carry knowledge in several minds, share food, raise children, defend a fire, and remember the route back to safety. Hunting large animals demands coordination, patience, and restraint. Gathering in harsh climates demands botanical knowledge that may be less visible in the archaeological record but no less essential. Clothing, shelter, fire management, food, storage and tool repair all become matters of life and death. The evidence remains incomplete, especially for perishable materials, yet what survives suggests that Ice Age humans are not merely enduring nature. They are actively organizing themselves against uncertainty. There is a lesser-known cruelty in cold environments. Survival depends not only on finding calories, but on managing time and risk. A group can starve even in a landscape full of animals if the animals cannot be reached safely or predictably. Meat can spoil, freeze, attract predators, or require transport over exhausting distances. Fuel must be gathered before the storm, not during it. Stone tools must be ready before the hunt, not after an animal is wounded. Clothing must be repaired before cold becomes dangerous. These needs encourage planning across days, seasons, and generations. The Ice Age mind, if we can use that phrase carefully, is a mind trained to think ahead. It is also a mind trained by loss. Entire animal communities shift under climate pressure. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, steppe bison, wild horses, reindeer, cave lions, hyenas, and many other creatures shape human experience in different regions and times. Some are hunted, some are avoided, some are watched as weather signs, seasonal markers, or powers moving across the land. Later, many of these animals will disappear, and scholars still debate the balance of climate change, human hunting habitat transformation, and ecological stress in the great extinctions near the end of the Ice Age. No single explanation fully accounts for every species in every region. But for the people living through those changes, the disappearance of familiar animals would not be an abstract ecological event. It would alter diet routes, tools, stories, and perhaps the emotional structure of the world. Migration carries its own dangers and revelations. As Homo sapiens spread into new environments, they encounter landscapes already known to other human relatives in some regions. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly other populations occupy parts of Eurasia before and during the expansion of modern humans. The details of contact remain debated, but genetic evidence shows that interbreeding occurred. This means the forgotten First Age is not only the age before writing, it is also the age when humanity, as later people know it, is not alone. Different kinds of humans share the planet, and then over time only one remains. That fact gives the Ice Age a deep loneliness when seen from a distance. Neanderthals leave tools, hearths, pigments, in some contexts possible ornaments and bodies that show adaptation, injury, care, and survival in hard climates. Denisovans are known from far fewer remains, yet their genetic legacy spreads into later populations, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. These relatives are not monsters from a separate world. They are close enough to exchange genes with Homo sapiens, yet distinct enough that their disappearance still troubles the story. Scholars still debate why they vanished as separate populations. Climate instability, small population size, competition disease, interbreeding and cultural differences may all have played roles. The evidence remains incomplete and certainty would be dishonest. For humans living then, none of this would have been framed as species history. There would have been encounters with others, familiar groups, strange groups, dangerous groups, useful partners, potential mates, rivals, kin by marriage, people whose tools looked different, people whose speech was difficult people, whose customs were not one's own. The grand categories come later. In the first age, identity is local relational, carried by face language, ornament, gesture, territory, and memory. The world is not divided into nations or written peoples. It is divided into known and unknown, trusted and uncertain, near and far. The Ice Age also sharpens imagination because the environment itself is so dramatic. A glacier is not just cold. It is a moving landscape of weight and grinding force. A steppe at dusk can hold enormous herds beneath a pale sky. A winter camp can become a small island of smoke and warmth surrounded by silence. A thaw can turn frozen ground into mud and flood. A dry season can pull life toward water until animals, predators, and people converge in dangerous closeness. These conditions leave traces in bones, pollen, sediments, tools, and campsites, but the lived experience is harder to recover. What survives in the record suggests resilience, but resilience is not comfort. It is repeated difficulty survived often enough to become tradition, and tradition is what allows human beings to cross deep time. The group that knows how to stitch hides, store fat red snow-fine stone-share meat, and calm fear has more than practical skill. It has inherited solutions. Every child born into such a group receives a world already interpreted. The cold has names, even if those names are lost to us. The winds have habits. The animals have tendencies. The dead have places. The fire has rules. Under glacial skies, then the first age grows sharper, wider, and more mysterious. Writing is still far away, but human memory is already carrying immense maps of survival. Climate presses and people answer with movement, cooperation, invention, and story. They do not conquer the Ice Age. They negotiate with it season after season until the ice begins to loosen, and the world they know starts to change beyond recognition. Then the ice begins to loosen and the world does not simply become warmer. It becomes unstable. Glaciers retreat in great slow withdrawals, but the consequences move through human lives with sudden force. Rivers swell with meltwater, valleys flood, forests creep into former grasslands, herds change their routes or vanish from familiar hunting grounds. Coastlines shift year by year, generation by generation, until places once walked, camped, and remembered are taken by the sea. The end of the Ice Age is often imagined as a release from cold, but for the people living through it, release also means disorientation. A world that had been harsh but knowable begins to rearrange itself. At first the changes may be subtle. A winter arrives softer than the elders expect. A plant grows farther north. A herd returns late, then returns in smaller numbers, then does not return at all. A marsh forms where dry ground once held tracks. A river cuts a new channel after a season of heavy melt. The group adapts because adaptation is the oldest human habit, but adaptation becomes harder when change touches everything at once. Animals, plants, water, weather, and coastlines all respond to the warming world and not always in predictable ways. The evidence remains incomplete, but sediments, pollen, bones, and drowned landscapes all suggest that the transition after the last glacial maximum was not a gentle turning of a page. It was a long unravelling and rewriting of the environments people knew. One of the most dramatic transformations occurs at the edges of the sea. During the coldest phases of the Ice Age, so much water is locked in glaciers that sea levels are far lower than today. Vast plains connect lands that later become islands. Coastal shelves lie exposed. Rivers run across ground now buried beneath waves. People may live, hunt, gather shellfish, make camps, tell stories, bury their dead, and move along shorelines that no longer exist. As the ice melts, the sea rises and slowly erases these worlds. It does not erase them all at once like a single flood in every place, but from a human perspective the loss can still be profound. A grandfather may remember walking where his grandchildren see only water. This is one of the great silences in archaeology. Many early coastal sites are likely drowned, scattered, or hidden beneath sediment. Because coasts offer abundant food and easy movement, they may have been central to human life far earlier than the surviving inland record can show. Shellfish, fish, seabirds, marine mammals, driftwood salt, and coastal plants make shorelines rich places, especially for groups who know tides and seasons. But when the sea rises, it takes the evidence with it. What survives in the record may be only the higher, drier remainder of a much wider human world. The First Age is forgotten not only because no one writes it down, but because the earth itself covers part of it with water. In some regions, the rising sea cuts land apart. Britain separates from continental Europe after the drowning of landscapes often called Doggerland. Australia and New Guinea, once joined in the larger landmass of Sahel, become separated by rising waters. Islands appear where hills once stood above plains. Channels widen, old routes close. Communities that once moved across open ground must turn to boats, new paths, or new boundaries. Scholars still debate the exact human experience of these changes in many regions, because the archaeological evidence beneath the sea is difficult to recover. But the geographic transformation is beyond doubt. The map inherited by one generation is not the map left to the next. The animals change too. The Great Ice Age megafauna, so powerful in cave art and hunting landscapes, begin disappearing in many parts of the world. Mammoths survive for a time in some refuges, even lingering on isolated islands long after their mainland relatives vanish. But the great age of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and many other large animals is ending. Climate change transforms habitats, forests replace open steppe in some regions, and human hunting adds pressure in ways that vary by place and species. No single explanation fully accounts for all extinctions, and scholars still debate the balance of causes. But the human consequence is easier to grasp. When a major animal disappears, it takes more than meat with it. It takes techniques, routes, seasons, dangers, stories, and a familiar presence from the mental landscape. The end of the Ice Age also brings opportunity. Warmer conditions allow new plants to spread. Forests provide nuts, fruits, wood, game, and shelter. Lakes and wetlands become productive. Fish, birds, and small animals become more important in many diets. People experiment with broader ways of living. In some places they become less mobile, returning again and again to favoured camps. In others they continue moving, but within landscapes that now offer different rhythms. The old Ice Age world does not simply collapse into emptiness. It transforms into a mosaic of new possibilities and new traps. There is a lesser-known tension here. As environments become richer in some places, they may also become more crowded. Reliable wetlands, river mouths, and forest edges attract animals and people alike. Groups may encounter one another more often. Boundaries may matter more. Seasonal gathering places may grow in importance. Exchange networks may deepen. Ritual places may become more fixed. The roots of later settled life begin not with a sudden invention, but with repeated returns to places that prove worth remembering. Yet this process is uneven. Some communities move toward long-term settlement. Others remain highly mobile. Many combine strategies in ways that later categories oversimplify. Memories of drowned lands and vanished animals may have endured in story, though caution is necessary. It is tempting to connect every flood myth or tale of lost land to post-Ice Age sea rise, and many such claims go far beyond the evidence. Still, it is reasonable to imagine that communities who watched water claim familiar places told stories about that loss. Oral tradition can preserve landscape memory, especially when tied to striking events, sacred places, or repeated warnings. The exact words are gone. The names are gone. But the emotional shape of such memories is not hard to understand. The old camp below the waves, the hunting ground that became a bay, the island that was once a hill, the animals that no longer come. After the great thaw, humanity stands in a world that is both ancient and newly made. The skills of the Ice Age do not vanish, but they must be revised. The speaking landscape speaks with a changed voice. Rivers run differently. Forests hide what open plains once revealed. The sea covers old paths. The dead may lie beneath water. The first age continues, but its stage has shifted. People carry forward what they can: songs, roots, techniques, warnings, memories of cold, memories of abundance, perhaps memories of loss so large they become sacred. Writing is still distant, but the human need to remember has grown heavier, because the world itself has shown that even the ground beneath memory can disappear. As the world warms and the old Ice Age landscapes retreat into memory, some human groups begin to return to certain places with a new kind of persistence. A river bend proves generous year after year. A lakeshore gathers fish, birds, reeds, and animals drawn to water. A hillside offers wild grains in season. A sheltered valley holds enough woodstone plants and game to make leaving less urgent than before. People still move, still hunt, still gather, still follow weather and opportunity, but in some regions the rhythm changes. Camps become more substantial. Return becomes expectation. Memory begins to settle into the ground. Before writing, before cities, before kings, and in many places even before full farming villages appear as one of humanity's quiet revolutions. They do not always look dramatic at first. A cluster of houses, storage pits, hearths used and repaired, burials placed near or beneath living spaces, post holes where wooden structures once stood, floors swept, rebuilt, and covered by later floors, refuse areas where bones, shells, ash, and broken tools accumulate. These traces may seem humble beside pyramids or palaces, but they mark a profound change. People are no longer only passing through a landscape. They are making certain places into centres of repeated life. A village before writing is not simply a collection of shelters. It is a new kind of memory machine. When people live in one place for longer periods, objects accumulate. Dead relatives remain nearby. Storage becomes possible and necessary. Paths form between houses. Shared work becomes regular. Conflicts cannot always be solved by walking away, or at least not as easily as before. The social world thickens. Reputation lasts because neighbours remain. Obligations become harder to forget. The ground itself begins to remember who was built, buried, repaired, feasted, quarrelled, and returned. The evidence remains incomplete because many early villages are made of perishable materials: wood, reeds, mud, thatch, fibre, and earth. But where conditions preserve traces, they reveal communities with careful organisation. Houses may follow repeated plans. Hearths occupy familiar positions. Storage areas suggest planning beyond immediate hunger. Tools show specialised tasks. Grinding stones become more common in places where wild or cultivated grains matter. Shells, beads, obsidian, and other materials from distant sources suggest exchange networks that continue without written contracts. No list records who owed what, yet trust, custom, and social pressure must have carried these arrangements. One surprising detail of early settled life is that it may have made humans more attached and more vulnerable at the same time. A mobile group can follow shifting food sources, but a settled or semi-settled community invests labour in place. Houses take effort. Storage pits take effort. Nearby burials create emotional gravity. Ritual spaces bind people to a location. Once that investment grows, leaving becomes harder even when drought, disease, conflict, or changing resources make life difficult. Settlement offers continuity, but continuity can become a trap. In some early communities, the dead are not placed far away in separate cemeteries, but remain close to the living. Burials beneath house floors or near habitation areas suggest that ancestry, belonging, and place may be deeply intertwined. A house is not just shelter. It may become a vessel of lineage, memory, and identity. The living walk above the dead. Children grow up where earlier generations were placed with care. Scholars still debate the exact meanings of these practices, and no single explanation fully accounts for all regions or periods. But the pattern suggests that settlement changes the relationship between people and time. The past is no longer only carried in stories, it is literally underfoot. Food also changes the social atmosphere. Storage creates security, but it also creates questions. Who controls the stored grain, nuts, fish, or dried meat? Who decides when it is opened? Who contributed more? Who receives help in scarcity? In a small mobile band, sharing is often immediate and visible. In a more settled community, surplus can accumulate, and accumulation can quietly alter relationships. What survives in the record suggests that the roots of inequality may begin before writing, before formal states, and before named rulers. Differences in house size, burial goods, diet, or access to valued materials can hint at emerging social distinctions, though interpretation must be careful. Archaeology can show unequal treatment, but it cannot always tell whether that inequality was based on age, skill, ritual role, kinship, wealth, or something else. Ritual spaces become more enduring as well. A temporary ceremony leaves little behind, but repeated ceremony in the same place can build architecture, deposits special objects and patterns of movement. People may gather seasonally to feast, exchange partners, settle disputes, honor ancestors, or renew group identity. These gatherings can occur before writing and even before permanent urban life. They create wider communities than any single village. A person may belong to a house, a kin group, a settlement, and also a larger ritual landscape marked by paths, meeting places, and shared symbols. Trade without writing depends on memory, but villages make that memory more stable. If one community is known for obsidian, another for shells, another for stone axes, another for pigments or woven goods, relationships can form across distances. Exchange is rarely only economic. Objects carry stories with them. A shell brought inland may speak of the sea to someone who has never seen it. Obsidian may connect a village to a distant volcanic source. A bead may become a sign of marriage, alliance status, or personal identity. The object travels farther than the maker's voice, but it still carries human meaning. Settled life also changes the body. Repeated grinding can mark bones and joints. Smoke from indoor hearths affects lungs. Diets may become broader in some places and narrower in others. Close living can increase exposure to waste parasites and infection, especially as settlements grow. Dogs and later domesticated animals alter the human environment. The village is warmer, more social, more protected, and sometimes less healthy. Progress in deep history is rarely a clean upward line. It is a bargain made with new risks. By the time villages take root across different parts of the world, humanity has already crossed a threshold that writing will later make visible but does not create. People are building remembered places. They are binding identity to architecture, food stores, ancestors, exchange, and ritual. They are making communities that can outlast a single season, and perhaps a single generation. No one writes the village name. No one records its founding. No one preserves the first dispute over stored food, or the first ceremony held in a rebuilt house. Yet the traces remain post holes, hearths, bones, beads, floors, graves, and worn paths between dwellings. The world before writing is becoming heavier with memory. Firelight and landscape still matter, but now earth walls, house floors, storage pits and burial places begin to hold the past in new ways. Human life is no longer only moving across the world. In certain places it is sinking into it. Somewhere in the highlands of southeastern Anatolia, long before the first cities of Mesopotamia rise from river mud, people climb toward a stone hill with work in their hands and ceremony in their minds. The world around them is not yet the familiar world of ploughed fields, royal storehouses, and written accounts. It is a world of hunters, gatherers, seasonal movement, wild grains, gazelle herds, pistachio trees, and limestone ridges under a wide sky. Yet on this hill people cut and move stones so large that they seem to belong to a later age. They shape pillars with animal reliefs. They arrange them in circles and enclosures. They return, rebuild, bury, and begin again. The place now called Göbekli Tepe does not give up its meaning easily, but it forces a startling possibility into the story of humanity's forgotten first age. Perhaps people gathered for belief ritual and shared identity, before farming fully remade their lives. For a long time, many accounts of early civilization imagined a simple sequence. First came farming, then permanent villages, then surplus, then temples, priest-rulers, writing, and states. Food production allowed people to settle, and settlement allowed religion and social complexity to expand. There is truth in parts of that model, but places like Göbekli Tepe complicate it. The site dates to a time when domesticated agriculture is only emerging in the wider region, not yet the fully established foundation of life it will later become. Its builders may have depended heavily on wild resources, including hunted animals and gathered plants, while participating in gatherings that required planning labor food and social coordination on a remarkable scale. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how exactly the site functioned. But its existence makes one thing difficult to ignore. Human symbolic life is not a decorative layer added after survival is solved. It can organize survival itself. The stone pillars are often described as T-shaped, some standing several meters high, with carved animals moving across their surfaces. Foxes, snakes, boars, birds, scorpions, and other creatures appear not as casual decoration, but as signs in a visual world whose grammar is lost. Some pillars seem almost human-like in form, with suggestions of arms, hands, belts, or clothing. They are not statues in the later royal sense, not portraits with names attached, yet they possess a strange presence. They stand upright, silent and watchful, as if marking a gathering place between human bodies, animal powers, and the deeper order of the landscape. No inscription tells us what they meant. No myth survives to explain which animal mattered most or why. What survives in the record suggests a symbolic system rich enough to bring people together, but not transparent enough for modern certainty. The labor itself is part of the mystery. Quarrying, shaping, transporting, and raising large limestone pillars requires coordination. It requires people to agree, or at least to be persuaded that the work matters. It requires food for workers and visitors, knowledge of stone shared timing, and some form of authority or ritual obligation. This does not necessarily mean kings or coercive rulers. The evidence for formal hierarchy at such early sacred centers remains debated. Authority may have been temporary, ceremonial, age-based, kin-based, or rooted in specialized knowledge. But large communal work changes a society even when no king stands above it. To build together is to imagine together. To return to a sacred place is to strengthen the memory of belonging to something larger than a household or hunting band. There is a lesser-known tension in such places. They may have helped create the very pressures that later encouraged farming. Seasonal gatherings require food at predictable times. Feasts may draw people from wide regions. Ritual obligations may bring communities together in numbers that strain wild resources. If many groups gather repeatedly, the demand for reliable grain, meat, and drink increases. Some scholars have suggested that the social and ceremonial life of the region may have contributed to the intensification of plant use and eventually agriculture, rather than agriculture simply creating ceremonial life after the fact. No single explanation fully accounts for the transition, and farming emerged through many small changes over long periods, but the idea is powerful. People may not have settled down only because they discovered crops. They may have cultivated crops because they were already becoming attached to places, gatherings, ancestors, and obligations. Göbekli Tepe is not alone in showing that pre-writing communities could build meaningful landscapes. Across different regions and later periods, people create monuments, ritual deposits, burial centers, and ceremonial spaces before writing gives these places names. Some are made of stone, others of wood, earth, or materials that survive poorly. Their purposes vary. Some may mark the dead. Some may gather the living. Some may align with seasonal events. Some may dramatize relationships with animals, ancestors, or powers beyond ordinary perception. Care is necessary because not every unusual structure is a temple, and not every carved animal is a god. But repeated investment in special places shows that people are building social memory into architecture. At Göbekli Tepe, one of the strangest features is that some enclosures were deliberately buried. This act has often provoked speculation, some of it careful, some of it unsupported. The safest interpretation is that burial was part of the site's history of use renewal, closure, or transformation, though the exact reasons remain uncertain. Yet even the act of covering a sacred structure can be meaningful. It suggests that endings were managed, not merely abandoned. A place could be completed, retired, hidden, or returned to the earth. The memory of the structure may have continued after it was no longer visible. In a world without writing, such acts matter. They turn architecture into ritual time. The animals carved at these centers also remind us that early sacred life does not stand apart from ecology. Foxes, snakes, birds, boars, and wild cattle are not abstract symbols detached from daily experience. They are creatures encountered in the real world, watched, feared, hunted, avoided, admired, and woven into thought. A snake moves between surfaces and hidden spaces. A bird crosses sky and ground. A boar is dangerous muscle in brush. A fox is clever, quick, and liminal. Modern interpretation can easily go too far, but the carving suggests that the natural world is not merely a backdrop for human ritual. It is the vocabulary through which ritual speaks. What makes these first sacred centers so important is not that they answer the mystery of the world before writing. They deepen it. They show that before accounts, before dynasties, before recorded theology, people are already capable of large shared projects organized around meaning. They gather where no one has written a law requiring them to gather. They raise stones for reasons strong enough to outlast ordinary need. They carve animals whose stories are lost but whose force remains. They create places where memory becomes heavier than a campfire tale, and more public than an ornament worn on the skin. The forgotten First Age, then, is not merely a prelude to farming villages and written states. It contains its own centres of gravity. Some are caves in darkness, some are rivers and burial grounds, some are stone circles on hills where people gather under open sky, bringing with them food, labour, fear, hope, and inherited symbols. Writing will one day claim the power to preserve sacred words, list offerings, name gods and record kings who build temples. But long before that, humans are already building places where the invisible seems close enough to touch. As villages deepen their roots and sacred places gather people into wider circles of obligation, another transformation begins to move through human life with quiet force. It does not arrive everywhere at once. It is not a single invention made by one brilliant mind in one fortunate valley. Farming emerges slowly, unevenly, through countless small decisions repeated across generations, scattering seeds near a camp, protecting a useful patch of wild grain, returning to plants that grow larger or ripen more conveniently, keeping young animals near the settlement, tolerating certain species, because they offer meat, milk, hides, wool, labour, or future security. What later ages call agriculture begins as intimacy with living things, but it soon becomes dependence. In the world before writing, this shift is difficult to overstate. Foragers know landscapes widely. Farmers come to know particular fields intensely. Herders learn the moods of animals not only as prey, but as managed companions, wealth, burden, and risk. A field must be cleared, watched, weeded, harvested, stored, defended, and remembered. A herd must be moved, guarded, bred, treated, and counted in the mind long before numbers are pressed into clay. The old seasonal intelligence does not disappear, but it narrows around new responsibilities. People still watch rain, soil, insects, animal behaviour, and moonlit nights, yet now failure can concentrate in one place. If the crop fails, hunger is no longer solved simply by moving to a distant patch of wild abundance. The village has weight. The dead are buried there. The houses stand there. The grain pits are there. The gods' ancestors or ritual obligations may be there. Farming feeds attachment. An attachment can make departure feel like defeat. The promise of farming is powerful. A successful harvest can support more people on less land than many older lifeways. Stored grain can carry a community through winter or dry months. Domesticated animals can turn grass scrub and waste into meat, milk, hides, manure, and labour. Surplus can feed specialists, ritual gatherings, builders, healers, tool makers, and those who no longer gather food every day. Population grows. Children once difficult to carry in highly mobile groups become easier to raise in settled villages, though easier never means easy. More hands can work fields, more families can share defence, more people can gather for ceremony, marriage, exchange and memory. But every promise has a shadow. Agriculture often brings harder labour. Bones and teeth from early farming communities can show wear from grinding grain. Repetitive work changed diets and physical strain. A diet that relies heavily on a few staple crops may provide calories while reducing nutritional variety. Teeth can suffer from starch-heavy foods. Bodies may grow under new pressures. The evidence varies by region, and scholars still debate the exact health consequences in different early farming populations. But the old idea that farming simply improved life is too simple. In many places, farming creates more food overall, while making individual lives more laborious, more crowded, and sometimes more vulnerable to disease. Crowding is one of the hidden costs. A mobile camp disperses waste naturally through movement. A village accumulates it. People live closer to refuse stored food, rodents, insects, and one another. Water sources can be contaminated. Parasites find stable hosts. Smoke from hearths lingers in houses. When domesticated animals live nearby, they add warmth, wealth, and danger. Diseases can move between animals and humans, and although the major epidemic patterns of later cities belong to a later world, the roots of that biological exchange begin here. The village becomes a new ecosystem, half human and half animal, rich with food and memory, but also with infection. Storage changes society just as deeply as fields change diet. Grain can be hidden, measured, guarded, stolen, gifted, taxed, or redistributed even before formal taxation exists. A full storage pit is security, but it is also temptation. It raises questions that oral custom must answer. Who owns the harvest, the household that planted it, the lineage that controls the land, the ritual authority that blesses the rain, the whole village that protects the fields? Who eats first when stores run low? Who decide when seed grain must be saved rather than consumed? No written law settles these questions yet, but decisions still have to be made. Custom becomes heavier. Authority becomes more visible. Memory must track obligations, debts, marriages, land use, and inheritance. Use. Herds add another layer of complexity. Animals can move, multiply, die, be stolen, or be exchanged. They create wealth that walks on four legs. A herd can mark status more visibly than a buried cache of grain. It can be counted by memory, recognized by markings, remembered by lineage, and defended with force. Herding also changes landscapes. Grazing animals alter vegetation. Hooves disturb soil. Manure enriches some places and fouls others. Forests may be cut for pasture and fuel. Fields extend. Human beings begin reshaping ecosystems with a new intensity, though not yet on the scale of later empires. The first age is no longer only adapting to nature. It is increasingly rearranging nature around human need. Agriculture also changes time. Foragers follow many overlapping rhythms, but farmers become bound to a cycle that punishes neglect. There is a time to sow, a time to weed, a time to harvest, a time to thresh, a time to store, a time to protect seed. Delay can be disastrous. Ritual may grow around these moments, not because early farmers are irrational, but because uncertainty is terrifying when survival depends on rain and growth. A ceremony for fertility, a taboo around seed, a feast after harvest, a mourning for failed crops. These are ways of living with risk. No single explanation fully accounts for early agricultural ritual, but it is easy to see why farming communities would surround food production with meaning. When the field becomes life, the field cannot remain merely practical. There is also a social cost in growing numbers. More people can mean strength, but also conflict. Land that was once freely used may become claimed. Paths may become boundaries. Water access may become contested. Marriage alliances may become tools for holding fields and animals. Burials may begin to display differences more sharply. Some houses may grow larger. Some individuals may be buried with richer goods. What survives in the record suggests that inequality develops unevenly, sometimes slowly, sometimes with surprising early force. It is not always clear whether wealth, ritual status, age, gender, ancestry, or skill explains these differences, but farming gives inequality new places to take root. Land surplus, herds stored food, and control over labor. Yet it would be wrong to describe agriculture only as a fall from freedom. Farming also creates tenderness of a different kind. People care for seedlings, lambs, calves, children, elders' houses, and graves in the same remembered place. They watch a field green after rain and feel hope rise from soil. They know the animals they will later slaughter. They save seed from the best plants. They develop cuisines, brewing, weaving, building traditions, seasonal festivals, and household histories tied to rooms and courtyards. Their world may be harder in many ways, but it is also dense with belonging. Before writing, these farmers and herders carry growing burdens in memory. They must remember season stores, kinship land animals, promises, rituals, and losses. The first age becomes more productive and more fragile at the same time. The field feeds the village, but the village now depends on the field. The herd enriches the household, but the household now fears disease, theft, drought, and pasture failure. Humanity has not yet entered recorded history, but the pressures that will one day demand records are already gathering like clouds over cultivated ground. As fields, herds, villages, and sacred places draw people more tightly into remembered landscapes, another force keeps pulling them outward. No settlement, however rooted, contains everything its people desire or need. The best stone may lie beyond the hills. Shells may come only from distant coasts. Salt may gather in rare places where water dries white under the sun. Pigments may be found in certain cliffs. Obsidian may gleam in volcanic lands far beyond ordinary walking routes. Fine wood, rare feathers, animal skins, amber copper-coloured minerals and unusual beads can move from hand to hand until they reach people who have never seen their source. Before writing, the world is already connected by trade, but trade is too narrow a word for what is happening. Objects move, and with them move stories, obligations, styles, marriages, rumours, technologies, and identities. There are no written contracts in this world. No merchant signs a tablet. No official seal proves ownership. No ledger preserves the memory of a debt. Yet exchange still works, sometimes across astonishing distances. It works through kinship, hospitality, ritual, partnership, seasonal meetings, repeated trust, and the force of reputation. A person who cheats today may find no welcome at the next gathering. A group known for fairness may receive visitors year after year. Gifts may create obligations more powerful than purchase. A valuable object may not be bought in the later commercial sense at all, but given, received, displayed, and passed on within a web of social meaning. The evidence remains incomplete because the words and gestures of exchange are gone, but the movement of materials across landscapes is unmistakable. Obsidian is one of the clearest witnesses. It is volcanic glass, sharp, dark, sometimes translucent, and it can produce edges of extraordinary fineness. Because obsidian comes from specific geological sources, archaeologists can often trace artifacts back to the places where the raw material formed. When obsidian appears far from its source, it reveals routes of contact that no written map records. A blade in one village may carry within it the memory of a mountain many days away. It may have travelled directly with its maker or through many exchanges from group to group, losing and gaining stories at each step. By the time it reaches its final owner, its value may be practical, beautiful, exotic, ancestral, or all of these at once. Shells tell a similar story, but with a different emotional force. A shell carried inland is a piece of the sea placed into a dry valley forest or highland settlement. It may become a bead pendant, ornament, offering, or grave good. To someone far from the coast, it may represent distance itself. The person wearing it may not know the tide pooled where it was gathered, but the shell still connects them to a world beyond their daily horizon. In some prehistoric societies, marine shells travel hundreds of kilometers inland. Scholars still debate the exact meanings attached to such objects in different contexts, yet their repeated movement suggests that people value more than utility. They value the rare, the distant, the recognizable, and the socially charged. Trade also spreads techniques. A new way of shaping stone, firing clay, weaving fibre, polishing axes, grinding grain, building houses, or managing animals can travel through contact long before anyone writes instructions. A visitor watches a method and brings it home. A marriage partner carries household knowledge to another community. A craft specialist moves between settlements. A group adopts a foreign style because it works, or because it signals connection to prestigious neighbors, or because it becomes beautiful in their eyes. No single explanation fully accounts for the spread of early technologies. Sometimes ideas travel with people. Sometimes they travel without mass migration through imitation and exchange. Archaeology must distinguish these possibilities carefully, and often the answer remains uncertain. Objects can also create identity across distance. A particular bead-style pottery form, carved symbol, burial custom, or tool-making method may mark a shared tradition. People who never live in the same village may recognize one another through forms they understand. A pattern on a vessel, a method of polishing stone, or a way of arranging grave goods can say without writing that this community belongs to a wider world of meaning. These signs are not scripts, but they are social language. They allow people to see familiarity in strangers and difference in neighbors. At seasonal gatherings, exchange may be inseparable from ceremony. People arrive with food, stone skins, ornaments, news, marriage possibilities, and ritual obligations. The meeting may involve feasting, dancing, repairing alliances, settling disputes, honoring ancestors, or marking changes in age and status. Goods change hands in ways that bind people together. A gift may remember an old favor. A bride or groom may move between groups carrying new ties. A rare stone blade may become part of a ritual relationship rather than an ordinary tool. Later, economies often try to separate religion, trade, politics, and family into different categories. But in the world before writing, they may flow through the same gathering like streams joining one river. There is a danger hidden in these connections. Exchange brings wealth and knowledge, but also envy, rivalry, disease, and dependence. A village that gains prestige by controlling access to a rare material may become powerful. A route that carries obsidian can also carry conflict. A valued object can create obligation, and obligation can become pressure. A group dependent on distant stone or salt must maintain relationships beyond its immediate control. If a route closes through drought, hostility, or migration, old certainties fail. The first networks are not simple roads of progress. They are delicate webs. Salt deserves special attention because it is easy to overlook and hard to live without. In some environments, salt is abundant. In others, it is scarce and deeply valuable. It preserves food, supports health, and flavors diets that may otherwise be monotonous. Salt sources can become meeting points, contested zones, or centers of exchange. Because salt itself often disappears from the archaeological record, its importance can be difficult to trace directly. But what survives in the record suggests that essential materials did not always leave durable monuments. Some of the most important things in human life vanish because they dissolve. The same is true of news. No artifact records every warning carried from one valley to another. A herd has moved, a river crossing, failed. Strangers are approaching, a disease has appeared, a marriage alliance is offered, a sacred gathering is planned, a drought has emptied the lower plains. Yet such information may be as valuable as stone. In a non-written world, travellers are moving archives. They bring not only goods, but updates to the mental map. They widen the known world. They make distant events matter. Trade without text therefore reveals a humanity already living beyond the scale of isolated villages. The forgotten First Age is crossed by routes, meetings, remembered partners, admired objects, and dangerous strangers. Its connections are not drawn on parchment, but they are real. They appear in shells, far from the sea, obsidian, far from volcanoes, ornaments made in shared styles and technologies that spread from hand to hand. Writing will later record shipments, taxes, contracts, and royal expeditions, but the older networks are already there beneath the surface. They are quieter, more personal, and in some ways more fragile, built not on documents, but on memory, trust, desire, and the long human habit of reaching beyond the horizon. Where goods move, memory grows heavier, and where memory grows heavier, power begins to find new shapes. Before kings announce themselves in inscriptions, before royal tombs list victories, before palace walls show captives beneath a ruler's feet, some people already stand closer than others to wealth, ritual exchange, and decision-making. The world before writing is not necessarily a world of perfect equality. It is also not yet the world of named dynasties and bureaucratic states. It lies in the difficult middle where influence may be personal, seasonal, sacred, inherited, earned, contested, or all of these at once. Archaeology can see the effects of power before it can hear power explain itself. The clues are often quiet. One burial contains ornaments, tools, pigments, shells, or rare materials, while another nearby grave is plain. One house is larger, rebuilt more often, or placed in a more prominent location. One part of a settlement contains special structures, storage facilities, or evidence of feasting. Certain objects are made with unusual labor, carried from far away, or deposited in ways that remove them from everyday use. A child may be buried with remarkable goods, suggesting that status might sometimes be inherited rather than earned through adult achievement. Scholars still debate the meanings of such evidence because burial is not a simple mirror of life. A richly furnished grave may reflect affection, ritual role, family display, symbolic compensation, or actual social rank. Still, patterns matter. When differences repeat, they begin to reveal a society where not everyone is remembered in the same way. Power before kings may first appear as the power to organize. Someone calls people to build, hunt, feast, move, harvest, or gather. Someone knows when the ceremony should begin, where the stones should be placed, which animals should be avoided, which marriages will repair a dispute, which route is safe after winter, which ancestor story carries authority. Such people may not be rulers in the later sense. They may not command armies or collect taxes, but they can shape action. In a world without writing, authority often lives in memory. The person who remembers genealogies, ritual sequences, exchange obligations, healing plants, seasonal signs, or the location of distant partners holds something valuable. Knowledge itself can become a form of leadership. Ritual authority is especially difficult to interpret because it leaves material traces without preserving the original belief. Special buildings, unusual deposits, masks, carved objects, animal remains, skull arrangements, painted spaces, or carefully repeated ceremonies may point toward people who mediate between ordinary life and the unseen. But the exact roles remain uncertain. Were they shamans, priests, elders, healers, ritual specialists, lineage heads, or something that does not fit any later word? The evidence remains incomplete. What survives in the record suggests that some individuals or groups had privileged access to sacred knowledge, but it does not always reveal whether that access brought wealth, fear, respect, or political control. In many early communities, the sacred and the practical may have been inseparable. The person who knows the ritual may also know the calendar, the plants, the animals, and the old alliances. Feasting offers another path into early power. A feast can look generous, but generosity can create obligation. To feed many people is to display abundance. To slaughter animals, distribute meat, offer special foods, or host distant visitors is to make social memory. Those who receive may owe respect, support marriage, ties labor, or future gifts. Feasting can bind a community together, but it can also reveal who has enough surplus to command attention. Archaeologists sometimes identify feasting through large accumulations of animal bones, special vessels, cooking areas, or unusual deposits. No single explanation fully accounts for every case, but repeated large-scale consumption often suggests organized gatherings where food does more than satisfy hunger. It becomes politics before politics has written offices. Conflict also enters the record, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. Wounds on bones, defensive locations, burned structures, mass graves, weapons, and signs of trauma suggest that the world before writing is not free from violence. But interpretation requires caution. A burned house may result from accident, ritual closure, attack, or abandonment. A skeleton with an injury may show warfare, murder, hunting, accident, punishment, or interpersonal conflict. Still, across many regions, evidence shows that as populations grow, resources concentrate, and settlements become more permanent, the conditions for conflict can intensify. Land, water, stored food, herds, exchange routes, and prestige goods all create reasons to defend and reasons to raid. This does not mean early settled life inevitably turns peaceful people into warriors. Human societies vary enormously. Some may manage tension through marriage, ritual exchange, dispersal, or negotiation. Others may harden boundaries and fortify themselves. What matters is that power before kings is already tied to the ability to protect, threaten, avenge, or negotiate. A respected leader may be valued because he or she keeps peace. Another may rise because danger makes force attractive. The First Age contains both cooperation and coercion, and the balance shifts with environment, population, wealth, and memory. Wealth before money can be surprisingly complex. A polished axe, a necklace of distant shells, a store of grain, a herd, a finely made blade, a rare pigment, or control over a salt source can all hold value. Some wealth is useful, some is beautiful, some is valuable, because others recognize it as rare. Some wealth is deliberately buried, broken, offered, or hidden, which reminds us that value is not always about accumulation. To destroy or deposit a precious object can be an act of devotion, rivalry, mourning, closure, or display. Later written societies often tell us who gives offerings and why. Before writing, the object remains, but the explanation is missing. Burials make this absence especially poignant. A grave with a decorated body, red ochre beads, tools, or animal parts invites interpretation, yet it withholds the name. Was the person beloved, feared, honored, powerful, unusual, sacrificed, healed, disabled, old, young, foreign, local? Archaeology can estimate age, sex, in some cases diet, injury, ancestry, and biological relationship, but it cannot simply read identity from bones. The dead before writing have social lives that can only be approached indirectly. What survives in the record suggests care and difference, but not the full grammar of grief. Settlements can show inequality without words. One household may have better access to storage, imported materials, or craft production. Another may sit at the edge. Some spaces may be communal, others restricted. Specialized production may concentrate skill and influence. If only certain people know how to make valued objects, fire, pottery, work stone, or manage exchange with distant groups, their expertise can become power. Yet specialization also depends on the community that feeds and supports it. The craftsperson, ritual leader, trader, healer, and organizer all exist within networks of obligation. Power grows not only by taking, but by becoming necessary. By this stage of the First Age, humanity is approaching a threshold. Villages have memory. Fields have ownership, or at least repeated claims. Herds have lineages. Ritual places have histories. Exchange networks have obligations. Burials have distinctions. Conflict has consequences that must be remembered. The weight of social life is increasing, but it is still carried largely by minds, objects, bodies, and landscapes. No royal name rises above the rest. No inscription declares that one ruler conquered another. No official archive records tribute law or punishment. Yet the foundations of later authority are already forming in the dark beneath history. Power before kings is therefore one of the most elusive parts of humanity's forgotten first age. It is visible only in shadows, a richer grave, a larger house, a special structure, a feast, deposit, a wound in bone, a rare object placed where ordinary life cannot use it. These shadows do not tell a complete story, but they show that human societies were learning how memory wealth, belief and force could gather around certain people and places. Writing will one day give power a louder voice. Before that power speaks through what it leaves behind. By the time villages have become rooted, fields have begun to bind people to seasons, and exchange has carried rare objects across long distances. Memory is no longer only a matter of survival stories and familiar paths. It has become a social burden. A small band can remember who shared meat, who married into which family, who knows the dangerous crossing and which elder carries the old songs. A larger village can still hold much of its life in living minds, especially when custom repeats and everyone knows everyone else. But as settlements grow, as surplus accumulates, as land becomes inherited, as herds multiply, as obligations stretch across communities, memory begins to strain. The world before writing is reaching a point where remembering everything accurately is becoming too important and too difficult to leave entirely to speech. This pressure does not appear suddenly. It builds in ordinary moments. A family stores grain after a good harvest, but some of that grain must be saved for seed, some for food, some for ritual feasting, some perhaps owed to kin who helped with the harvest, some promised in a marriage arrangement, and some needed for a household that lost its crop. A herder counts animals by sight and memory, but animals are born, traded, stolen, slaughtered, sickened, pledged, and inherited. A field has been used by one lineage for generations, but another family claims that their ancestors cleared it first. A toolmaker receives shells from a distant group and owes polished blades in return after the next season. None of this requires writing at first. Human memory is powerful and social pressure can be stronger than ink. But disputes grow sharper when memory supports food, land debt, and status. Debt before writing is especially difficult to see because debt is often invisible unless it changes material behavior. It may appear as repeated exchange, unequal burials, storage differences, or signs of redistribution, but the exact promise is gone. One person owes labor, another owes grain. A household owes a bride wealth payment, a ritual gift, a share of meat, a future feast, a favor after drought. These obligations may be remembered through witnesses, ceremonies, knots, tokens, notched sticks, marked objects, or repeated public speech. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how early communities tracked such commitments in different regions, but the problem itself is clear. The more complex the society, the more dangerous forgetting becomes. Counting is one of the first answers. Long before full writing, people make marks, tallies, tokens and symbolic objects that may help track quantities. A notch can stand for a repeated event. A clay token can represent a measure of grain, an animal, or a unit of goods in some later prehistoric and early administrative contexts. A sealed container can preserve a record of what should be inside even before signs become true writing. Such systems are not yet literature, law, or history in the later sense. They are memory aids. They do not need to capture the sound of speech. They only need to stabilize an agreement. This is a profound shift. memory begins to leave the living witness and enter a controlled object. That shift changes trust. In a purely oral agreement, trust rests on people, those who promise, those who hear, those who remember, those who enforce shame or punishment. With objects, trust begins to rest partly on things. A token mark, seal or tally can travel where a witness cannot. It can outlast an elder. It can sit in storage and wait for the moment of reckoning. But objects also create new dangers. They can be hidden, altered, stolen, misunderstood, or controlled by those who know how to read them. The tool that helps memory may also concentrate authority. The person who manages the tokens, seals the containers, or interprets marks becomes important in a new way. Land makes memory even heavier. A moving group can remember territories through paths and stories, but farming turns specific plots into long-term claims. A field is not just soil, it is labour already invested. Clearing stones, cutting trees, building irrigation channels, in some places improving ground, defending crops, burying ancestors nearby, and tying households to harvest cycles. When land has history, disputes become disputes over memory. Who worked it first? Who inherited it? Who has the right to water? Who may graze animals after harvest? Who owes labour to maintain a canal fence terrace or path? No single explanation fully accounts for how land rights developed in all early societies, but repeated settlement makes some form of recognised access almost unavoidable. Water adds another pressure. In dry regions, managing water can require cooperation beyond a single household. Channels, wells, flood, timing, storage, and field distribution demand coordination. Someone must remember schedules, obligations, repairs, and rights. If water arrives too early, too late, or not at all, memory becomes political. A forgotten promise may mean hunger. A broken agreement may destroy trust. Later states will write water rules, taxes, and labour obligations, but the roots of such administration lie earlier in practical needs that oral custom must first attempt to hold. Population growth compounds everything. More people mean more marriages, more inheritance lines, more quarrels, more labour, more mouths, more fields, more burials, more remembered favours and injuries. In small communities, personal knowledge can regulate behaviour. In larger ones, strangers and semi-strangers become part of daily life. Reputation still matters, but it cannot cover everyone with equal force. A person may deal with someone whose grandparents were not known to their grandparents. Exchange reaches farther. Authority becomes less intimate. Rules need to travel beyond the memory of a single household. Ritual may help carry this weight. Public ceremonies can renew boundaries, confirm marriages, redistribute food, settle disputes, and make obligations visible. Feasts can transform economic tension into shared memory. Burials can assert ancestry and claim land. Seasonal gatherings can repeat the order of society so that everyone sees it again. But ritual is not always enough. It depends on participation, belief, and shared recognition. When wealth grows unevenly, when storage becomes concentrated, when leaders or ritual specialists gain influence, old forms of memory may become contested. What one group remembers as justice, another may experience as control. The path toward writing is therefore not simply intellectual curiosity. It is not only the desire to tell stories more permanently, though that desire matters deeply. The earliest practical pressures point toward accounting, ownership, administration, and obligation. People need to know how much grain, how many animals, which goods, whose labour, what promise, which field, which offering. Writing will later preserve myths, hymns, laws, letters, royal boasts, and private grief, but its first roots are often humbler and colder, the management of surplus. There is something almost melancholy in this. The older world of memory around the fire does not disappear because people become less intelligent or less devoted to story. It begins to give way because human life has become too dense for voice alone. The village is full of stored food, inherited land ritual duties, exchanged debts, contested status, and growing numbers. A society can still sing its past, but it also needs to count its obligations. A mark that once meant presence begins to mean quantity. A token that once sat in a hand begins to stand for property. Memory once carried by elders begins to harden into systems, and as memory hardens, something changes in the human relationship with time. The past is no longer only what the living remember. It becomes something that can be checked, stored, sealed, and used against someone. The future is no longer only imagined in story and season. It becomes scheduled through debt harvest, delivery, and repayment. Humanity has not yet fully entered the written world, but the door is opening. Behind it lies a new power, the ability to make memory official. The first written marks do not appear like a curtain rising on poetry. They arrive quietly, almost dryly, in the company of grain animals, labour jars, fields, and promises that have become too numerous to hold securely in living memory. Before writing becomes a vessel for epics, prayers, royal names, wisdom, curses, and love songs, it is closely tied to administration. It begins with the hard, practical need to remember quantities, ownership, deliveries, offerings, rations, and obligations. This may seem disappointing at first, as if humanity invented writing not to preserve wonder, but to manage warehouses. Yet that is exactly what makes the birth of writing so revealing. The first permanent words are born from pressure. They appear when society becomes heavy enough that memory needs an external skeleton. In southern Mesopotamia, among the mud brick settlements and temple economies that grow along the Tigris and Euphrates, clay becomes the chosen surface. Clay is ordinary, cheap, and everywhere. It can be shaped while wet, marked with a reed dried in the sun, and sometimes hardened by fire. It does not look majestic at first. A small tablet can fit in the palm. Its signs may record barley sheep jars of oil workers' land or offerings. Yet in these modest tablets a new age begins. Speech and memory start to separate from the body. A person no longer has to be present for an obligation to remain. A storehouse no longer depends entirely on the honesty of whoever remembers its contents. A mark can accuse, confirm, demand, or preserve after the speaker is gone. The earliest writing systems do not emerge in exactly the same way everywhere, and scholars still debate the details of their development. In Mesopotamia, clay tokens, sealings, numerical marks, and pictographic signs appear to form part of the long background from which cuneiform writing develops. In Egypt, writing also emerges early tied to royal power ritual display labels, ownership and administration. Elsewhere, writing develops independently or through influence in different forms and centuries. The evidence remains incomplete, and the boundary between symbol accounting, mark, proto-writing, and full writing is not always easy to draw. But the general transformation is clear. Marks begin to carry information in a standardized system that others can recognize beyond the immediate moment of making. This changes power. In a world without writing, authority depends on presence, reputation, memory, ritual, kinship, and force. With writing, authority gains distance. A command can travel. A record can outlive a witness. A delivery can be checked against a tablet. A worker can receive rations according to a list. A temple or palace can manage goods gathered from many households. A ruler's name can be repeated across objects, seals, monuments, and distant lands. Writing does not create hierarchy by itself, because hierarchy already exists in many forms before it, but it gives hierarchy a new instrument. It makes administration durable. It lets power remember more than ordinary people can easily challenge. There is a strange silence in this birth of writing. The first written records tell us much, but not everything we most want to know. They preserve the concerns of institutions more readily than the voices of ordinary people. Grain is counted, animals are listed, labours assigned, offerings are recorded. Names appear, but often as parts of transactions, not as full human lives. A woman who brewed beer, a farmer who delivered barley a herder, who owed animals a worker who received rations may enter written history only as a mark in someone else's accounting. Writing saves them from total invisibility, but only narrowly. It remembers what bureaucracy needs to remember. This is why writing is both a miracle and a filter. It allows later people to hear the ancient world with unprecedented clarity, but only through channels shaped by power economy and preservation. Whole songs may still vanish while a receipt survives. A private grief may disappear while a list of goats remains. The humour of a household, the accent of a village, the fear before a flood, the tenderness at a burial, the old stories told under stars, these may remain outside the tablets. What survives in the record suggests a society increasingly organised by institutions, but beneath those institutions the older human world continues. Voices, gestures, songs, meals, quarrels, love, memory and ritual still surround the written mark. The act of writing also changes the mind's relationship with truth. Oral memory can be flexible, adapting to context while preserving core meaning. A written record appears fixed. It seems to stand apart from the speaker. This gives it authority but also danger. A tablet may be wrong. A scribe may make an error. A record may favour the powerful. A debt written down may outlive the circumstances that made repayment impossible. A boundary recorded by authority may overwrite older memories of shared use. No single explanation fully accounts for all the social effects of early writing, but it is clear that once memory becomes official, disputes can be fought not only through witnesses and custom, but through documents. The scribe becomes a new kind of specialist. Writing is not easy. It requires training, discipline, signs, numbers, materials, and institutional support. Those who can read and write stand between spoken life and recorded life. They translate grain into marks, labour into lists, authority into durable form. In later centuries, scribes will copy literature, hymns, myths, laws, letters, and mathematical problems. But at the beginning, their role is already powerful, because they manage the border between memory and control. To know the signs is to access a world others cannot fully inspect. Yet writing does not erase the first age overnight. For a long time, written and unwritten worlds coexist. Most people remain non-literate. They continue to learn by watching, listening, repeating, working, and remembering. Farmers still read clouds. Herders still know animals by sight. Mothers still teach children with touch and voice. Craftspeople still carry skill in hands more than in texts. Rituals still live through performance. Writing grows inside a much older ocean of oral knowledge. The tablet is new, but the fire circle has not vanished. What changes is what can cross time with precision. A written name can survive where a spoken genealogy dies. A transaction can remain legible after everyone involved is dust. A ruler can claim greatness beyond the reach of living witnesses. A temple can accumulate records across generations. For the first time, memory can become an archive in the later sense stored, sorted, consulted, copied, and guarded. Humanity enters recorded history not because human life becomes richer, but because certain parts of it become more durable. And so the birth of writing is also the birth of written silence. It preserves, but it selects. It illuminates, but it casts shadows behind what it chooses not to hold. The forgotten first age does not end because people suddenly become historical. It ends because institutions learn to make some memories permanent. From this point onward, the past will speak more clearly, but not always more honestly, and not always more fully. The clay tablet opens a door, and through it comes history carrying both revelation and loss. After writing begins, the earlier world does not vanish from human life, but it does vanish from the kind of record later ages learn to trust. The first tablets, labels, seals, and inscriptions create a new brightness in the past, and that brightness draws the eye. Suddenly there are names, numbers, offices, offerings, rulers, storehouses, fields, workers, gods, and cities that can be followed with a precision impossible for earlier ages. History seems to begin there because the page tablet or monument speaks in a form modern people can recognize. Yet behind that first written light stretches an immeasurably longer human darkness, not empty, but unrecorded by words. The forgotten first age remains the larger part of the human story. This is the great imbalance at the heart of history. A few thousand years of writing can feel vast, but they are only the final surface of a much deeper human sea. Before the first scripts, people have already crossed continents, survived. Ice ages watched coastlines drown, buried their dead painted animals in caves, built sacred centers, exchanged rare materials, domesticated plants and animals, founded villages, made ornaments, remembered ancestors, and formed traditions that lasted longer than many later kingdoms. Writing does not create humanity's mind. It gives one late version of that mind a durable shadow. What is lost when writing begins is not intelligence or imagination, because those remain. What is lost is the dominance of memory carried in living performance. In the older world, knowledge depends on people gathering, repeating, watching, correcting, singing, touching, walking, and remembering together. After writing, memory can stand outside the body. That is powerful, but it changes the balance. A story can be fixed but also frozen. A law can endure but also harden. A name can survive, but countless unnamed lives can disappear behind the few names institutions choose to preserve. No single explanation fully accounts for how people experienced this change, because most people for a long time still lived largely oral lives, but the direction is clear. Human memory begins to split between the remembered and the recorded. Archaeology tries to listen to the older side of that split. It reads ash stains, teeth, pollen, bones, tools, pigments, house floors, residues, footprints, shell beads, seed remains, and the chemistry of ancient bodies. It studies microscopic wear on blades, isotopes in enamel, DNA in bone starch grains trapped in stone and sediments beneath drowned coastlines. These methods have made the world before writing far less silent than it once seemed. They can reveal diet migration, kinship disease, climate, craft trade, and sometimes even moments of startling intimacy. A child's footprint beside an adult's, a repaired injury that suggests care, a bead worn smooth by long contact with skin, yet the evidence remains incomplete. Archaeology can show that people gathered in a cave, but not fully why the cave mattered. It can show that a body was buried with ochre and ornaments, but not the name spoken over the grave. It can trace obsidian to a distant volcano, but not the tone of the meeting where it changed hands. It can reveal that a village burned, but not whether the flames came from accident, attack, ritual closure, or grief. The first age remains partly unreachable, because human life is more than what survives materially. Much of it was made of sound, breath, trust, fear, habit, and meaning. Still, what survives is enough to overturn the old prejudice hidden in the word prehistory. These people are not waiting for civilization. They are making worlds in forms that later history often forgets how to value. Their achievements are not only monuments, they are roots remembered across generations, skills held in hands, ecological knowledge carried by elders, social rules maintained without courts and symbols, powerful enough to draw people into darkness or onto stone hills. They live without writing, but not without history in the human sense. Their histories are just more vulnerable. The legacy of the forgotten First Age remains inside the written world that follows. Agriculture, settlement, ritual, architecture, trade, hierarchy, craft specialization, oral epic, sacred landscapes, ancestor memory, and the habit of marking meaning onto matter all begin before writing fully arrives. The scribe does not invent memory, the scribe inherits it. The city does not invent community. It enlarges and reorganizes older forms of belonging. The temple does not invent the sacred. It builds walls around powers people have long sensed in caves, animals, storms, rivers, ancestors, and sky. Even now, modern life still carries traces of that earlier inheritance. People remember through songs. They attach identity to places. They keep objects because touch and memory cling to them. They gather around firelight or its modern substitutes to tell stories that explain danger, loss, origin, and belonging. They mark graves. They make symbols. They trust written records, yet still depend on living voices for meaning. The First Age is not gone in the way a collapsed palace is gone. It is buried inside ordinary human behavior. So the world before writing remains both distant and intimate. Distant because no one can recover its lost languages in full, its vanished myths, its private names, or the precise thoughts behind every painted animal and buried bead. Intimate because its people were recognizably human in hunger, care, fear, skill, memory, and wonder. They stood in landscapes larger than themselves and tried to make them knowable. They watched the dead leave and found ways to keep them near. They saw marks endure after hands vanished. They learned long before history had pages that human life is fragile unless memory finds a place to live. And now the story slows because the First Age does not end with a single dramatic fall. It fades gradually into the written world like firelight thinning at dawn. The tablet appears, the seal is pressed, the ruler's name is carved, and history begins to speak more loudly. But behind every written line there are older voices no tablet can hold. There are hunters crossing cold plains under stars whose constellations had different names. There are gatherers kneeling beside plants they know by scent and season. There are children learning the shape of danger from an elder's hand. There are people standing at the edge of a rising sea, watching familiar ground disappear beneath water that will keep its silence for thousands of years. The forgotten First Age teaches a quieter lesson than the monuments of later civilization. It reminds us that most of what humans are has never been written down. Love was not waiting for letters. Grief was not waiting for tomb inscriptions. Intelligence was not waiting for schools, libraries, or laws. The human mind had already filled the world with meaning before the first scribe learned to make meaning durable in clay. Writing preserved much, but it also made the unwritten seem less real. The deep past asks us to look again to see that a handprint on stone, a bead in a grave, a path beside a vanished river, and a hearth beneath old sediment are not small things. They are the edges of lives once complete. Somewhere beneath the present, those lives remain in fragments. Under fields, under cities, under forests, under desert crusts, under the continental shelves, now covered by sea, the first human worlds sleep without names. They do not return as full stories. They return as traces, and the traces are enough to humble every later age that thinks memory begins with itself. Long before writing, people looked into darkness and left signs that they had been there. They could not know who would find them. They could not know that one day after empires rose and vanished, after languages were born and forgotten, after history's filled libraries, a distant future would still be trying to understand the silent marks of their hands. And so, the last image is simple: a fire low in the night, A circle of faces, a landscape waiting beyond the glow, and a story moving from one voice to another before any word has ever been written. The sparks rise, the voices soften, and the oldest human archive continues carried for one more night in memory.